Welcome into the CHGO White Sox podcast. On today's show, I will be joined by prospect guru, wonderkin Elijah Evans, to talk about the White Sox prospects. I'm so happy that this gets cut out in post. The CHGO White Sox podcast next. Podcast coming to you live from Studio B of our CHGO offices here in the West Loop of Chicago. I'm your host, Sean Anderson. We're being produced today by our pal, Sarah.
Hi.
Hello. And we are going to be joined right away, immediately, by wunderkin Elijah Evans of Future Sox and Just Baseball. You can follow him over on X and Blue Sky at Elijah EV8. Elijah Evans is joining us on the Hooters Hot Wings Hotline. Hi, Elijah. How are you?
Appreciate you having me. It's a nice word to describe me. I'm not sure I'd go that far, but I'm happy to be here as always.
Well, I can't think of the word that James Fox uses. He uses pretty much something of the same ilk, calling you, they used to call me the Phenom at 670 The Score. And then, Elijah, when you get to like 25, people just stop caring. People stop giving you cool nicknames. So, enjoy it while it lasts. Elijah's joining us to talk about the White Sox prospects. Again, you can follow him on X and Blue Sky over at Elijah Ev8. He does a podcast called you're a part of the Call Up because that's the Just Baseball one. Do you also call the one with Dylan the Call Up?
That one's the Roundup. Close.
Roundup. All right. That's where I'm colliding. All right. So they do the Roundup. Him and at Not Cease do a great job over at Future Sox. And during the season, you're interviewing minor leaguers here and there. I remember you talking to Nick Nastrini, Jordan Leisure. So Elijah does a great job, great work. We're very excited to have him. Elijah, there's some Chicago news going on. Prospect for the Chicago Cubs, Alexander Canario, 24 years old, was DFA'd by the Cubs to make room for Justin Turner on their 40-man. I'm perplexed. I'm flummoxed. I have no idea why they did that with Vidal Brujan easily available to cut. We don't need to go into the Cubs move, but it is a player that I think the White Sox should be in on. I know you think differently. Lay out the scenario and let's talk about this. Should the Sox pick up Alexander Canario?
Yeah, so what's tricky with Canario is like you like the idea of a high power outfield bat makes sense within the White Sox system when you think about it, right? But out of minor league options at this point, he ended the year with the big league club, got hurt, goes on the IL, so can't go down to the minor leagues. The White Sox have 5 outfielders on major league contracts right now. You're in a situation where you're banking on a guy that's profile right now is already trending the direction of an Eloy Jimenez, and I hate to make that type of comp, right? But it's like a lot of power. A below average defender, stuck to a corner probably. He played center fielder earlier in his career, but he's definitely a corner outfielder with poor defense, has not hit enough consistently. He's going to whiff a lot. The power upside is there, but it's like, are you really moving off of any of the outfielders that are on major league contracts for the sake of a guy who you don't know if he's ever going to really hit at the big league level? I am not sure I can see him ever hitting at the big league level. The power is enticing. I don't think situationally it makes as much sense. And I do think the Cubs will end up trading him rather than him just getting, DFA'd and sent, optioned or claimed by somebody else. Right. So I think they're going to get some sort of trade for him, and the White Sox don't have a spot for him on the roster and they can't option him to the minors.
Yeah. I just think the athleticism and the seeming power is just so alluring. I understand that obviously they're not going to get rid of Robert to bring in Canario. That would make no sense because they're looking to move him. We'll talk about him in a second. They're not going to be able to move Benintendi. I think we would all love that, to pick up a guy like Alexander Canario, but that's just unfeasible. But I don't know. I'm not too attached to Michael A. Taylor. I think it might be possible that Michael A. Taylor gets cut from the White Sox and he's still available come May. That if, Canario is such a flop, they could just go back onto the waiver wires and pick up a guy similar to Taylor. I know they're seemingly trying to build up the defense, and it seems like they might move Benny to more of a full-time DH, and then Taylor can man left field, Robert can man center field, and then Tauchman and Slater are in right field. But I don't know. Am I just that sold on Michael A. Taylor needing to be on this roster. I just think Canario, too, when you look at the bat speed, it's a very small sample size, only 40 swings in 2024. But it does seem like he does swing a very fast bat, even when they're tracking it down in the minor leagues. 78-mile-per-hour bat speed. There's only 3 players that had a higher bat speed. John Kenzie Noel, O'Neal Cruz, and Giancarlo Stanton. Canario's whiff rate was 40%, where Noel's 30.5, Cruz's 32.6, Stanton's 32.2. Like, is that 8% difference, you think, just like too egregious? Because even then, if you have Luis Robert Jr. playing left field, and I think Tauchman and Slater will do all right in right field, I think you could probably slide him in left field. Like, you bring up Eloy Jimenez. I don't know if he's as bad as Eloy Jimenez.
He's not quite as bad there. Yeah.
Eloy's never playing center field.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I think it's interesting right from that aspect. That 8% is a lot more than it may sound like, to be honest. Really, 35% plus whiff rate when you're looking at prospects and you're evaluating is a number and a plateau where you're like, this is probably not an everyday big league hitter no matter what happens. I don't think there's a world where he's an everyday big league hitter because of that, unless he can kind of reduce that, right? Then it's like, I can see the idea and I can see the appeal, but the other thing with Taylor is they signed Taylor to a big league contract. It's not a minor league deal for Taylor, right? So as much as you may not love him, yes, but like that's
and they're only paying like 70 million. Like they could eat the 2.
I get it, but we know how the White Sox operate. They signed him to a big league contract. He's probably going to open the year with the team, and he's your insurance policy in a Taylor as the one guy who can play a legit center if you do end up trading Robert if a package comes along the next month or 2. So I think it's an interesting idea. I ultimately don't think it happens. I think there's going to be a smaller market team, similar, younger team that needs offensive power that's going to actually trade, a minor league pitcher flyer to be able to get a Canario onto their roster.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know Penn Murphy's weird. He's got a funky arm angle. Penn Murphy for Alexander Canario, who says no? Just final stats out here, and we'll move on from Canario. Canario's barrels in 2024, 27 barrels. Coulson had 25 in AAA. Colas had 17. Deloach 15. Elko 15. Ramos 14. So he did outmash any of the White Sox players in Charlotte. And then you bring up the 35% whiff rate in 2023, 32.3% in AAA, 2024, 37%. So it did balloon there by 5%. Let's move on to players that are currently with the Chicago White Sox. I saw you put out a clip from your podcast with Dylan talking about Luis Robert becoming a Mariner. I have 2 teams, one in the AL, one in the NL, where I think Robert will end up. Why don't you pitch me on the Mariners, a team that's been fairly inactive this offseason?
Yeah. So that was one of the 4 teams we talked about in the podcast, because there is a few others that I think will cross over on one of these teams. But, the Mariners are the team that I don't think they will, but they should. They make the most sense from the standpoint of needing a bat. They need offensive power. They need to find a way to juice that lineup up. They have the best pitching rotation in baseball, arguably, maybe up there with the Dodgers, right? And then you've got an offense that just has been stagnant the past few years. They have missed out on the playoffs, and they've missed out on genuinely contending with an elite pitching staff, right? Because they cannot have any offensive consistency. Yeah, Luis Robert is also inconsistent and you don't know exactly what you're going to get, but you at least have the upside of a guy that paired with a Julio Rodriguez, with a Cal Raleigh, with a Randy Arozarena adds a serious layer of excitement to your lineup. With that, right, they have 5 or 6 borderline or already top 100 hitting prospects. That's what the White Sox need, right? Like there's such a clear match there in terms of need on each side, right? Their hitting prospects are exactly the type of players the White Sox are going to be targeting in a Robert trade. Meanwhile, they need offense at the major league level that's already ready, right? So they have a number of guys you could give to the White Sox as a headliner, in addition to a bunch of other young, exciting hitters in their kind of 10 to 20 range in their farm system that could be added into that package to really make an enticing deal for the White Sox without even them having to trade their top 2 or 3 guys that they don't want to have to trade.
Yeah, and part of trading Robert, at least right now, with the reports coming out of Cincinnati, is that the White Sox might have to attach some money to it. I think that's the biggest thing with Seattle, is that they're likely going to have to eat some money for Seattle, a team that's just been so trigger shy on spending money this offseason. Doesn't feel like they're just going to willingly accept $17 million. I don't know of any of their egregious contracts right now. I don't even think they have any. I think that's the whole point. It's basically Julio, and then they got five rookies. I mean, Castillo makes some money.
Castillo's expensive, but not crazy, right?
So, I mean, maybe if he's terrible mid-season, they could take on some Luis Castillo money, but I don't know. One of the 2 teams that I have, and we'll see if there's any crossover. The first one is in the NL, the Arizona Diamondbacks. Yes or no?
I didn't have that at all because I think they like their outfield core, right? I think they are very comfortable. They've already said Corbin Carroll is going to take over in center primarily this year, right? So I think that's kind of my hesitancy there is they have Carroll, they have Gurriel, they have Jake McCarthy, they still have Alec Thomas, right? So they have outfielders. Do I kind of like that idea? Yeah, honestly, I don't mind the idea. I think it's fun. I think that team is on the verge of being up there with any team in baseball, and they kind of could use one or two more pieces. I don't know what they would look like in terms of a prospect return compared to some other teams that might be a little bit more of a fit in terms of what they could give back.
Right. I immediately go to Jordan Lawler just because who wouldn't want Jordan Lawler? And then you also think, but the Perdomo extension,
doesn't
right?
change
I mean,
anything.
that was weird.
It doesn't change anything, I don't think. It's weird because it is weird, but I think they view Lawler as a guy that could shift to third or second in the future. Eddie Eugenio Suarez is probably not the long-term guy there. I think Cattell is good at second, of course, but is still getting, into his 30s, right? I can't see them trading Lawler. Would be awesome, but I couldn't imagine it personally.
Yeah, if we're talking about 2023, Luis Robert Jr., maybe. But
right.
No, it does seem over the top. And the one thing that I just thought with Arizona is I think he is an upgrade over McCarthy in center field. And that's what I think at some point, if a team's really going to go for it, it seems like Arizona has gone for it, they're going to have to think, all right, we can upgrade immediately. You also have Jordan Montgomery with his bad contract. Maybe that could be attached to make something work out with Arizona. The other team, there's probably overlap because this is the team that has the most top prospects in all of baseball. It's Baltimore. And I think there is a true scenario where Baltimore's not spending. We haven't seen them spending. And you have Mullins, who's making $8 million and is going to be a free agent afterwards. Could you see them kind of trading in Mullins to upgrade Robert? Because again, the prospects haven't seemed to work out for Baltimore, but you also have their owner saying, we're going to go out there and spend. If Robert is having a nice all-star, if he's going up to the all-star break with around 20 homers, the 130 weighted runs created plus he had come in July of 2023. Do you see a scenario that could work out with Baltimore where they're just trying to upgrade over Mullins, who is he's injured and shaky?
Being completely honest, I have spent the last 2 years mocking the White Sox players of the Orioles, whether it was Dylan Cease, whether it was Garrett Crochet, whether it was Luis Robert. I mean, every single player the White Sox have had available the past few years, I've mocked the Orioles at one point or another and then put together a package of whether it be Basayo or Kerstad or Bradfield or all of these guys they have in their system. They just don't do it. They refuse to do it. This offseason, they chose to allocate money to Sagano from Japan, who's by all accounts no more than a back-end starter, Charlie Morton at 41 years old, right? Instead of actually spending on a singular impact player. The Orioles are taking this approach the past few years of let's just fill out roster spots where we can in affordable ways instead of actually getting the big-name guys. They made the move for Corbin Burns. They refused to they weren't even at the table with him this offseason in terms of actually keeping him around town, right? They had the chance last year. They could have easily beaten out the Padres package for Dylan Cease. They could have put one guy in on the table, right, in terms of one of their elite hitters, and they would have had Dylan Cease last year. They don't do it. And I think they make sense. I could see the logic behind trying to upgrade Mullins, right? But it's like, I just don't believe that they're going to move off any of their top prospects to the point where the White Sox would actually want to deal with them, as opposed to teams that have a little bit more, ability to trade and are shown more willingness to trade. I think, unfortunately, the Mariners and Orioles are probably the best fits, right? But I don't think either one is going to have the guts or the ability to actually get a trade done.
It's a shame. And the one thing, too, with the Orioles, I mean, you have Westberg at third base. Mayo's going to need a spot to play. He can't, you can't have anyone at short because you have, I was going to say Ethan Holiday. Not even Ethan Holiday. Gunnar Henderson. At second base, you have Jackson Holiday. I mean, at first base, you seemingly have Basayo because you can't put Basayo behind the plate because you have Adley Rutschman.
And Mountcastle. They still have Mountcastle first too. It's a total mess in Baltimore. I think I get that they're trying to not give up their young players because they know they're not going to be the team that gets the huge free agents, right? So the logic is you need to keep those young guys around because that's your affordable way to maintain being competitive. But they're blowing their window right now. They've been blowing their window for the past 2 years, unfortunately. And I want that team to succeed. I think everybody does. They're a fun young team with a good core. But at some point you have to go in. And that's something that we continuously see teams refuse to really truly do. And that's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out. And the most important thing, too, the only way Luis Robert Jr. is getting traded is if he actually plays well. Do you think he's going to do all right? Are you expecting 2023? Are you expecting just better than 2024?
It's somewhere in between. I was working through the Zips projection, actually, the Fangraphs projections for the White Sox roster, and they have him at like a 730 OPS with like a 107 WRC plus. I think he's better than that. I think he's a good hitter. I think if he is actually healthy, I think you'll get an 800 OPS out of him. I don't think you're getting 2023 Luis Robert, especially with the trade rumors, with the energy, with him being one of the only guys from that former core left on the roster. Right, he doesn't know the team anymore, right, like he used to. I think you'll get a decent year out of him and they'll still be able to trade him. I just think it's going to come down to who kind of bites first in a team being willing to take the risk versus the White Sox being willing to actually trade him at the value they might not quite see as equal value for him.
Yeah. I mean, it was weird. He only played it was about 16 games from the start of the year to June 13th. He had a 200 batting average, 266 on base percentage, and then a 583 slugging. So if he has that hot start where he's just murdering baseballs and they're somewhat competitive, I think we'll see Robert buy in a little bit. I think that injury where he gaps a double in Kansas City and then comes up lame and he's coming back to a team that is as bad as they are. I think there was truly just a lack of buy-in from him. I think reasonably, but I also think to your point, I think he's going to be better than a 107 weighted runs created plus. We have to take a break here on the CHGO White Sox podcast. We'll finally get into some prospects. I guess Canario's kind of a prospect, but we'll get into some White Sox prospects with Elijah Evans after the break. We want to let you know about our dear friends over at Hooters. Elijah is joining on the Hooters Hot Wings hotline right now. You can go to originalhooters.com. Is there any better combination than Hooters and Chicago sports? I learned that at a very young age. I went there when I was 4 years old. When you have a mom and dad that didn't get married, sometimes you have to tell your mom that you went to Scooters. And since your mom is not stupid, she'll realize what you're telling her, and then she'll get mad at your father. So, hey, there you go. Shout out to Hooters for the childhood trauma. You know what's great? Hooters wings. Sarah just brought it up. She had them about, an hour and a half after they were delivered. I had them about an hour after they delivered because I was late to my show. Had to get this Cubs show set up. The Cubs show's finally over. They're somehow still crispy. Even though they're sauced, even though they've been sitting there for an hour and a half, even though they're still not fresh, and even though hey, they got the tin containers, so they were still warm. But truly, they still held up, and it was very, very surprising that wings could sit out like that and still bring a punch. Crispy, and they were fantastic. What makes the original Hooters so special? It's simple. They care about their people, the food they serve, their guests, and community. And every Tuesday in February through 2025. Or through 225, your wings cravings can make a difference. Hooters is donating a portion of chicken wing sales to Holy Family Schools, helping fund tuition, books, classroom supplies, and more for kids in under-resourced communities. So head over to originalhooters.com to see the location nearest you. There's 11 Chicagoland Hooters locations. Shout out to the one in Oak Lawn. There used to be right by a Saturn dealer where my mom bought her Saturn, so shout out to the Saturn. Check them out. Originalhooters.com. You could order them for pickup and delivery over at originalhooters.com. We also want to let you know about our friends over at Waymo, our new friends over at Waymo. If you are down in Phoenix for the Camelback Ranch spring training starting on Saturday, check out Waymo. It's an autonomous ride-hailing service that operates in Phoenix. These cars are entirely driven by themselves using cameras, LIDAR, and radar. Over the past few years, their service has grown to serve a majority of the Phoenix Valley and provide a safer, more eco-friendly ride-hailing service for everyday consumers. It's very easy to get around. If you're heading over to Arizona for spring training, use Waymo to get around. It is just very similar to any other ride-sharing app that you have used. It is typically cheaper than an other ride-sharing service, and it's something that you could show off to your friends, too. You get to save some money, and you get to be driven around just like you would be, but by an autonomous driver. So head over to the Waymo One app. Download the Waymo One app and get ready to experience the future with our friends over at Waymo. Back here on the CHGO White Sox podcast with Elijah Evans from Future Sox and Just Baseball. Again, follow him at ElijahEv8. Elijah, let's talk about some of the... And he's gone. All right, cool. Well, Elijah Evans was here, and we really appreciate him joining us. He's calling in right now, and we will ask him the same question in about 3, 2, 1. Error starting the interview, and here comes Elijah. This is the fun of live entertainment, folks. You never know when the guest can possibly drop out.
Bad man.
You're all good. It's not your fault. Elijah Evans is back here. What I was asking, there was a question earlier about Coulson Montgomery being left off of Keith Law's top 100 over at The Athletic. What do you make of him being left off a top 100 completely when he's mainly not even below 50 on other outlets? So what do you make of Law's ranking?
Personally, Keith Law has always been low on Coulson, actually. So that's the one, a top 100 that has always been significantly lower on Coulson, even when he was, top 20 looking beginning of last year prior to in 2023, right? Keith Law was always kind of back at the top 100 on him. I don't put too much stock in that, honestly. I think that that's a somewhat reactionary, honestly. I think that it's easy to look at a singular season and say, oh, a guy's not what we thought he was, right? But Coulson's a really talented player. I think I've seen him play a lot in person. I've seen him go through, struggles and understand the struggles, right? Like I talked to him in Charlotte last summer when he was really in the midst of it. And he was like, this is a learning experience, right? Like I've never had this type of struggle in my life. I have to figure this out. I have to work through things every day. Like, I don't think that's something to put too much stock in. I think that generally the consensus on him is lower than it was at one point, a year or two ago, right? Like that's what happens when you have a rough season as a top prospect. You're going to get some negative reviews. You're going to go down on prospect boards. Sure. He looked really good in Arizona in the fall league in October. He all points, all accounts say that he looks really good coming into spring training. The White Sox clearly have made it a point that he is going to be the shortstop in Chicago at some point this year, whether it's out of camp, whether it's midseason. He's going to be in Chicago this year. He's going to get a lot of innings. He's going to start at shortstop. I'm not too worried about, one list having him that low.
Just to evaluate him as a shortstop, it does seem like he might not be athletic enough for the position. Yeah. He's not really that good going to his left, not really that good going to his right. It seems like his arm might be average, nothing better than average. Do you think that he's going to stick at shortstop for at least 2 to 3 years before them evaluating a little bit more? Or do you think he might just get one season, one shot at it, and if he looks really terrible, they just might move him off? Because Tim Anderson was terrible in his first couple years at shortstop. Obviously, Tim's a better athlete than Coulson Montgomery, but and smaller. So what do you think of Coulson's future there?
I think it's going to be a somewhat situational, dynamic with the White Sox, right? Like I think on other teams, they would say, hey, look, I actually think his arm is average, if not a little bit above average. I think his arm is going to be fine on the left side of the infield. I think his range is limited, right? So on many other teams, they would say, hey, we have another option at shortstop. We're going to slide you to third. You're going to be really solid at third, and we feel good about you at third base, right? The White Sox don't have an option at shortstop. They have some guys who are utility players in a Brooks Baldwin and a Chase Meadroth who can play shortstop, but he's the guy you can see being a high-end player at the big league level, right? So I think you want that type of player to be your shortstop if he can be. He's come up as a shortstop. He was drafted as a shortstop. He wants to be a shortstop. The team wants him to be a shortstop. They're going to give him every chance to prove that he can be until it's clear that he can't be. So I don't know if that's necessarily, I know that's kind of a vague answer. I don't know if that's necessarily 1 season or 4 seasons, or maybe he keeps growing and he continues to add athleticism to his game and he sticks at shortstop for 10 years for the White Sox, right? Like there's really no way to completely gauge it. I don't think that's most likely. I think he probably is a third baseman at the second, at some point in his career, but they're going to give him a chance to earn that job if he can.
Well, right now, I think you'd be pretty shocked. I'd be pretty shocked that if in 2026, the left side of the infield is not Coulson at short and Ramos at third. And if it's not Ramos, it's Vargas. If Vargas plays well enough,
somebody at third. I think the other thing with the Sox, you have 3-4 guys that are competing for time at third base right now. So you really can't even afford to say, hey, Coulson, go play third when you've got Ramos playing third, you've got Vargas playing third, you've got Josh Rojas who's played more third base, that he can play other places, right? But he's played more third recently than he's played shortstop or second, right? So you've got at least 3 guys, maybe even more, that are trying to get innings at third base. Meanwhile, you don't have anyone that you want playing shortstop or feel really good about playing shortstop. So you're going to give him a chance. He's going to play shortstop this year. I think he's going to play shortstop next year too. We'll see what happens. We'll see how good it is, but he's going to get a shot for sure.
And what everyone's telling me, and I don't know if you feel similar, it seems like Chase Meadroth isn't a shortstop. So there's another guy who is a top 200 prospect that some people might even be a fringe top 100 prospect. I saw someone, it was one person, I swear to God, said he was a top 100 prospect. It seems like he's more of a third baseman and second baseman. So just more, it's a good problem to have, but definitely something that they have to be wary of. Not to harp on this too much, but questioning on where they rank within Major League Baseball. Kylie McDaniel put him as high as 2. I think Keith Law had him at 12. You see players like Edgar Caro on some outlets missing the top 100. You see Grant Taylor making it on some outlets in the top 100. Coulson obviously up and down, but it does seem like, again, there's about 9 players that could be realistically in a top 100 for the White Sox, maybe 8. But what do you make of the current health? Is it a top 10 farm system right now in baseball? Top 5? Is the lack of bats like truly a big worry?
I think that before the Garrett Crochet trade, you could look at the system and say, hey, there's a lot of arms and there's only a few bats. Now you've got 2 more bats that are top 100 type guys, right? I think Kyle Teal's consensus top 100. Braden Montgomery might not be on a few, but he should be, in my opinion. I think him not having played any games in the minors is what keeps him off of some of them. But I think he's a top 100 talent once he's healthy and fully, into the rhythm of things, right? It's got to be a top 10 system. I really can't see how it's not. I know it's not in every publication, right? But I think it's somewhere in between, right? I don't think it's the second best system in baseball. I don't think it's outside the top 10. I think it's probably in the 4 to 7 range in Major League Baseball. I think you could make a case that it's a top 5 system, or at least a borderline top 5 system. You've got the 2 best left-handed pitching prospects in all of baseball, right? That's the starting point. And then when you move down from there, you've got guys in Teal, in Caro, in Montgomery, and both Montgomerys, right? Those 4 are guys that you expect to be everyday big league players, right? Those are the 4 guys you can look at and say, those are our everyday offensive pieces. No matter where they end up positionally, those are 4 guys you want to be bats in your lineup every single day. Beyond that, Grant Taylor, ton of upside, right? There's a chance this year he jumps into that upper tier of pitchers. He's not in the tier right now with Schultz and Smith because he hasn't shown it yet. I could easily see Grant Taylor with the stuff he has jumping into that, consensus top 100 tier this season. It's going to take a good season and he's going to stay healthy for sure, but he could get there. And then you go beyond that and the layers of a farm system that really allow you to see kind of where the system is among Major League Baseball, right? You've got your young pieces, your projects in a Caleb Bonnemer and a George Walkow. Those are your projectable young bats. You've got pitching depth, Mason Adams, Sean Burke. It keeps going beyond that, right? Drew Thorpe is still sort of a prospect. I'm not exactly even sure if he is, but it keeps going, past that. I don't think he is. I agree. But it keeps going past that, right? It goes into, the depth of the system. You go down to the lower levels. There's a lot of good pitchers. Aldrin Batista, Juan Carrella, recent draft picks that were just came into the system, right? A lot of college age hitters that just got into the system the past year or two in the draft. There is a deep core of players in this system from the top down that we have not had in quite some time within the White Sox organization. And for me, that makes it a pretty clear top 10 and bordering on top 5 because of the upside that they've brought in the last year or two, especially.
Absolutely. I think we disagree on this as well. Who do you think is going to be on the White Sox sooner, Edgar Caro or Kyle Teal?
I don't think it should be close. I think it should be Caro. I think a lot of people, I think it's Caro, and I think Caro should have a chance to crack the opening day roster. I don't think he will, but I think he should be given every opportunity to prove that. This is my thing. Yes, you want to save service time. Yes, you want to, keep them along. Like, yeah, sure, this team's not going to be competitive this year. Caro didn't play a ton in AAA. I get all that, right? If Edgar Caro comes into camp and over the next month, he is so clearly better than Corey Lee and Matt Theis, he should be on the roster. I don't care at that point, right? Like, let's see what he does. He made a lot of swing adjustments last year. His swing and his power and his offensive upside is in an entirely different place than it was even a year ago from now when he was first getting kind of acclimated into the White Sox organization. He is a upside hitter at a premium position and is still figuring things out defensively, but it was a lot better last year. It was a lot better at times last year than it was the previous season or 2 seasons ago for Caro behind the plate, right? So if he is the best catcher in camp, I'm fine with him being on the roster, and I don't think he will be, but he should have a shot.
I don't hate that, actually. I actually think we end up agreeing, because if you framed it this way, who do you think has or should have a better shot to make the opening day roster out of camp, Caro or Montgomery? I would say Caro. I don't think Coulson should be the opening day shortstop, and if Caro was on the opening day roster, I don't think I'd care that much. I don't think Caro ends up being it. I think it's Tyson Lee, but I do agree with you that Caro's further on. Do you think that Caro and Teal are both in AAA if Caro doesn't make it?
So the interesting thing to consider is, assuming it is Tyson Lee, which I think we both think it should be, even if we don't want it to be, right? I think the cool thing with those two is they can kind of create a simulated version of Chicago in Charlotte for those two, where they figure out what their split looks like before they reach the big leagues. And then you can bring those guys up almost simultaneously, right? Like you don't have to bring them up at the same time, but you can bring them up within the same month. And if you've figured out over a month or two what their split is going to look like in Charlotte, you carry that into Chicago. And hopefully from the deadline on, you're having those two catch every single game, right? And then you can play around with, which one of them can play first a little, which can Teal slide into right field a little bit. Like, what does that look like going forward? So I think that the value in them being in Charlotte, assuming neither of them make the roster, is that they can kind of blend together and figure out that catching split in Charlotte simultaneously.
You brought up Noah and Hagen being the top lefty prospects. What do you think about Noah's timeline? I think we heard 115 innings is the expected workload for him. Yeah. Do you think all of that's going to take place in Birmingham? What's your expectations for innings pitched? And then, do you think we even see Schultz in 2025, or is that waiting until 2026?
Yeah. I don't think that either Schultz or Smith touch Charlotte. I just don't think it's necessary. I think the White Sox, you saw with Drew Thorpe, who is not the same degree of a pitcher, frankly, as either Schultz or Smith in terms of the upside, right? They don't have a need to pitch guys in Charlotte. They might, because it's, you get to face big league quality hitters, but at the same time, Charlotte it's a bandbox. The offense dominates there. It always has. They like their staff in Birmingham. They like the way that guys have been developing in Birmingham. They've kept kind of all these core pitchers together along the way, right? I think that Schultz is going to be in Birmingham. I think they'll both be in Birmingham to start the year. You're going to get, hopefully 5 to 6 inning starts out of him, as opposed to 4 last year when he was just throwing, he was limited to 4 innings. He never pitched past the 4th inning. You're going to get 5+ innings out of him in his starts this season. If he's as good as he was last year, he's going to debut this year. That's what I'll say. I don't think you can keep him in Birmingham for 6 months if he does what he did last season, which was absolutely shove last year against guys that, he was facing hitters that have 2-3 years more experience than he does in the minor leagues. And he was the best pitcher and was just simply better than everybody he was facing on most given days in Birmingham. I think that both these guys debut. I really do. I think Smith is a little bit of a harder sell because he just hasn't thrown much yet in the minors, right? But what he did in college last year, I think there's a real chance both these guys get a August or September call up. Probably not till September, frankly. But I think if you build their innings up and they're healthy, I would love to see 3-4 starts out of each of those guys to finish the season, because then you can go into 2026 and say, here's 2 aces that we're adding to this rotation, and they're ready to go.
Yeah, and with Schultz and Smith, if you want to go see some pitch data, Brian Bannister shared some in his replies of what they did yesterday, and it's very exciting to see their nasty major league stuff already. All right, real quick, we got to wrap up here, but I just want to talk about 2 more guys. George Wilco, I think just on potential alone, he has to be a top 10 prospect. I understand whiff rate, but outside of whiff rate, explain to me why he's not a top 10 prospect.
It's just a really risky profile, right? Like I have him I think I had him at either 10 or 11 on my personal list. Okay. So like, I'm with you there. It's gotta be, he deserves to be in that spot. I'll have my personal list will come out in a few weeks for Future Sox, but it's like, the upside is crazy, right? You've got a super athletic, lean guy who's just, when you see him in person, it's crazy to even like talk to him, honestly, because he's, so young and already so physically advanced, right? He's going to be a plus defender. I think he's, especially in right field, like the arm is exceptional. He's got the athleticism. He's not slow. He's actually got borderline average speed, if not even more than average, maybe for his size, for sure. The power is immense, right? He just has to shorten the swing. It's really just going to come down to like, if he can make enough contact, he will be a high-end prospect very soon. It's just, there's a lot of risk there, and there's a lot of breaking ball development, right? He's a guy that was a high school draft pick, didn't even play his senior year of high school. He finished high school in 3 years. He doesn't have the experience against breaking stuff and off speed that every other hitter in the minor leagues does, right? He zoomed through the Arizona Complex League too. He just needs to figure out how to hit off speed. I know that's like so simplistic, but it's like, if he can reduce the whiff and just learn how to approach off speed in the next year or two, he crushes fastballs, man. Even good fastballs, he was taking opposite field 400 feet, right? Like, the power is crazy. He deserves to be in that borderline top 10 conversation.
Like 470, dude. Like, don't even undersell him.
It's
bombs.
It's nuts.
Is it Winston for him? Will he start Winston, do you think?
No, it's going to be Canny again, I think.
Okay.
I think it's going to be Canny again, just because there's so much to still grow there with him at the plate. I think he'll reach Winston this year, which is still crazy considering he's so young. But I do think he starts in Canny again, just because there's still a lot of that plate approach stuff to work through, and you're not going to see quite as good of breaking balls at the single A level. So they want to just keep getting him adjusted to more breaking stuff.
Final guy, I guess, like, this is like, all right. So I'm asking about Riku Nishida, but who is your like under the radar guy that you love the most, and why is it Riku Nishida? Because it feels like even though like he is probably not even on a top 30 or top 20 list, it feels like most Sox fans, he was being asked out in the comments. People love Riku Nishida. I mean, is he a top 30 prospect for the Sox? Please say
people love Nishida. I can't say he's a top 30 prospect, just for me personally, because the profile is so tricky to project as a major leaguer. He's 5'5", probably on a good day. Slap hitting, I don't think he's hit a single home run. I don't think he will hit a single home run in the minor leagues, probably. It's so fun. He's super fast. His plate approach is exceptional. He's probably the best at recognizing pitches in the entire farm system, honestly. It's just you're going to have to see some degree of a tick up in his impact offensively, whether it's just an increased exit velos or just a little bit more launch angle to his swing, right, where he can at least be a gap-to-gap guy instead of just a singles guy. The walks, the singles, the stolen bases, awesome, but I don't think it's still very hard to project him as a big leaguer. The guy that I will mention quickly, I know we got to wrap, is Aldrin Batista. You've heard me talk about him before last year. Of all the pitchers in the system, that's the guy that I will be kind of circling this season and watching in the lower levels more than probably anybody else at the lower levels of the system. This is a guy that is not going to get the headlines because of everybody else above him in the farm system, but it's super fun. Everything he throws moves. He's young. He's athletic. He's loose. A Dodgers product, right? Like, I'm always going to be keying in a little bit on a young international Dodgers signing that the White Sox acquired, right? This is a guy that I think is, only got better last year when he went from single A to high A. When he got to Winston, he was even better than he was in Kannapolis. I think we're going to see Batista in Birmingham this year, and it's going to be like, oh, we just watched Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith pitch. 2 days later, we're going to get to see this guy, and it's like, whoa, that guy just had almost as good of a start as Hagen Smith. Who is this? And I think that's going to start to be the reaction from a lot of White Sox fans, and I've been on the train with him since 2023, and I think this year you're really going to see him kind of make that jump into a consensus top 15 guy in the system.
You would have him right now over Wiekelman?
Yeah, I have him right next. I have him right next to each other, basically, just because Gonzalez has just established himself a little more, is further along in his development. But I do have them right around the same spot as each other, and I think by the end of the season, Batista could be in that top 12 to 10 conversation if he really does what I think he could this season.
Very interesting stuff from our guy, Elijah Evans. Again, he can find his work over at Just Baseball and Future Sox. You can follow him at ElijahEv8. We appreciate it. Joining us on the Hooters Hot Wings Hotline. Go enjoy that California sun, you SOB. I see it coming through your windows. Hit that thumbs up button. Man. Make sure you're subscribed to the CHGO Sports YouTube channel. Follow Elijah. We'll talk to you next week on Monday when spring training baseball has started.
We all silly like the mayor.